Welcome back to Voice Global. I'm Pete Erickson, your host, and this is part of our conversation series, Meet the Author. And in this case, we have two authors with us today. The book is Conversation with Things, and the co-authors of this book are Diana Deibel and Rebecca Evanhoe. Diana and Rebecca, welcome to Voice Global.
Thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely. And congratulations, first off. I want to ask, just out of the gate here, before we get to know you even better, how long has this book been in production? When did this start?
2 months into the pandemic, I think we signed on the dotted line. So I guess about a year, almost exactly.
Awesome. Well, I always like to understand a little bit more as we get started here, just about how much effort goes into getting a book to market. In this case, you've spent over a year. Let's get to know you both a little bit. If you don't mind, Diana, tell us about you and your background, and then we'll go to Rebecca.
Sure. My name is Diana Deibel. I'm currently a design director at Grand Studio, which is a product design and strategy consultancy in Chicago. That basically means I work on kind of a lot of different types of design, including conversation design, but also screen design, service design, kind of solutions that incorporate all the bits and pieces. Prior to this, kind of like the long story short is I went to school for playwriting. I got a degree in that, went to New York, worked in entertainment for a while, moved to Chicago, and there was less entertainment. So I found myself doing more like commercials and B2B videos, and kind of losing the momentum and motivation that had propelled me through the first part of my career, and found that there was still script writing opportunities in health tech. So I moved into health tech and kind of found my way into design that way, doing different kinds of content design, ultimately conversation design, and also qualitative user research. So that's kind of how I made my way here.
Wow. Actually, I love that story. We're going to touch on that more in just a minute. Definitely. Rebecca.
For me, it's funny, Diana and I started in very different places in our lives and then sort of converged in similar ways. So my undergrad degree is in chemistry, randomly, kind of an all-around nerd. I have an MFA in fiction writing, and it's through my writing background also that I got into conversation design at a health tech startup. So that's where Diana and our stories start to converge. But I've been a conversation designer for 9 years. I think Diana and I met, I want to say I forget the timeline, it's in the book, but 4 years ago, I want to say. Yeah, I've been working on all different kinds of projects since that first startup. Hospitality, insurance, finance, doing chatbots, doing voice stuff, doing conference rooms that you talk to. And I'm currently a visiting assistant professor at Pratt Institute, where I teach a course in conversation design.
Wow. Okay. So what a cool intersection, Master of Fine Arts and somebody who is pursuing playwriting from both a creative and professional standpoint. It's not a mistake that you both have that kind of background. I want to share a quick story. When we were first starting, really building this voice community, we went on a 10-city tour in 2017 to train people how to build their first voice experience on Amazon Alexa. And we were used to the idea that a lot of developers would come to our events. And I think one of the things that stuck out with me is we had a lot of creators and a lot of writers and a lot of folks with your type of background that were coming to these workshops that, typically you've got developers, and now we've got all these, writers and creatives. So I'm delighted to hear the backgrounds and delighted that you both, that your stories converged. And now today, the industry is going to benefit through this book, which is just coming out. So that's so exciting. I also want to share, I was looking through, and, I like to read the forwards and the quotes from others. And, one of the people I really admire in this industry is Kathy Pearl. And I think Kathy said it really well. She said, Deibel and Evanhoe lay out best practices for conversation design using practical, actionable examples, and do it in such a way that it's a delight to read. And so congratulations on such a quote from such a notable industry leader as Kathy Pearl.
Yeah, we're both big fans of Kathy, and she's been quite a supporter and mentor for us throughout this process.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, co-authoring a book, and I have to tell you, this book is chock full. I mean, it really is lays out the roadmap for folks that are new to the industry and just trying to get their hands around what is conversation design and what's it all about, all the way through, the industry pro and the person that, already has a good handle on conversation design and needs to take their capabilities to the next level. So congratulations on really hitting a broad audience here and making this a useful book for everybody. Let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned the beginning of the pandemic and feeling like was an opportunity to pour yourself in. So take us back to the beginning. How did all this start?
I will caveat that we did not see the pandemic coming and think this is a good opportunity. We thought, hey, let's do a thing. And then it became the pandemic. And I think we may have regretted that decision.
Oh.
It was, yeah, we've been, so I like to say to Diana when our book was frustrating, we were really tired of it, I would say, this is your fault because this is Diana's idea. We were chatting one day and she had, I think someone had talked with you about maybe doing a book, and you said, is that something you'd want to try to do together? And we wrote a proposal and we sent it to our two favorite publishers. One of them is Rosenfeld. And they were interested in the book. So, it took months and months to kind of get to the place where we all shook hands. But yeah, it was such a delight that one of our favorite publishers wanted to work with us.
Yeah, and we'd heard such great things from other authors at the Rosenfeld community about working with their editorial staff and working with their marketing staff. And so we were really excited that it would be, I think, as holistic and supportive of an experience as we were hoping for.
And I'll say the actual writing of the book, it's never easy. Add on to that the layer of the whole world looking like it had never looked before. It was definitely a challenge. And like Diana said, there were some moments where we were like, can we keep doing this? Like, are we going to hit our deadlines? Is this going to be as good as we want it to be? Mm-hmm. But ultimately, I think we got there. I think we had high goals and I think we met them.
Well, congratulations, because it has been a shifting landscape. It's been a changing world before our very eyes. The market has changed, the dynamics, the priorities of the market, and the way that obviously we go about doing things. So good on both of you for navigating that and actually getting to this point. I'm sure there were a lot of days that it was not easy. So let's, you open the book with why conversation design. And I would love for you to summarize that real quickly. So for those that are watching out there that are just trying to understand, or how to prioritize conversation design as it relates to overall technology strategy, what would you say to somebody? What does chapter 1 tell the reader kind of in summary? Why conversation design?
I think one of our big observations, well, and I mentioned this in the book, one thing that I observed a lot was a lot of companies, by the point we started the book, had already built chatbots or voice interactions. Mm-hmm. And then they started hiring people like me as a consultant to fix them because it wasn't very conversational.
Right.
When really no one on the team had thought about how people talk to each other and had spent time thinking like, this is what we're trying to imitate. How does that work? And where does the technology add up and where does it fall short where we are today? So chapter 1 kind of goes through some of the technologies, some of the big issues that we see. We give you the lay of the land on like, here are terms we're going to use. Here's what they mean. Here's what conversation designers do. Just really setting up like, this thing is missing. It's important. And here's the basics of how this field is starting to look.
Yeah, it really mirrors a lot of, our book is a UX book. It's just UX for conversation and voice and chat. So it's the same fight that UX for screen design went through of there's a reason that design needs to be at the table and needs to be considered, because as we've learned through screen design, if you just build the thing that you can build without thinking about what a user actually needs and what should be built, then you're not going to get something that's successful and adopted in the market.
Right, right. I think that's probably, as I've witnessed this market evolve, I think it is that there is, and this also goes back to your backgrounds, there's a lot of art to this industry that's also supported by science. It's pretty cool blending, I think, of the art and the science. I mean, chapter 2, you talk about talking like a person, and I think that that's probably, you know, once you answer the why, the next thing is, well, then, you know, how. And I would say that's been the biggest evolution, and we're still seeing it. I mean, I think that devices are getting smarter, and what I mean by that is they're the skills and the actions and the apps that we interact with, they're sounding more like a person would talk versus you know, a scripted response. Can you comment on that and how you're seeing this market evolve?
Yeah, I think we've so we talk about this between ourselves kind of a lot. The idea that there's some really cool functionality and just some cool tech stuff that's happening. And I think the key to this now, which is a bit of an overplayed song in our book, is just because you can, should you? And how do you use it so that it's actually appropriate for that specific context or that group of users? And so some of the stuff that we've talked about recently with each other is the idea of sentiment analysis and reading people's emotions. And the, you know, there's like a kind of couple layers in that, which I won't get on my soapbox too deeply, right. But there's the layer of, you know, reading it accurately, what you're going to do with it, why you're going to do that, and just trying to parse through some of these cool new functionalities that we can do in voice and chat to make sure that they're applied appropriately and applied in a way that actually provides value to the user ultimately without causing harm.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned without causing harm. I think that there's also some really cool the way that you weave in trustworthiness into the importance of your solution. You mentioned sentiment and emotional responses. You know, I think about the web equivalent might be dynamic content, right? Where, you know, a very, you know, different users can see different things, but maybe you're not showing something to somebody, you know. So dynamic content sort of unveiled some of these challenges with regards to inclusivity. But let's talk a little bit about that. You talk about trustworthiness really early in the book, and then you bring it around in the end to designing inclusive conversations. And I see this interesting, you know, not parallel, but I see this weave, if you will, in an overall strategy. I wonder if you could just comment some on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that Diana and I think that connected us is this like shared interest in really like our love as people over the technology. People interest us. So that's sort of the motivation behind, you know, our work and our approach to things. And so this inclusivity part, this ethical problem the industry is facing was really important to the work. And also it's not this abstract thing. So like one of the things we really wanted to do is make sure that we show that like your everyday decisions as a conversation designer are inherently potentially ethical, or they're inherently inclusive or exclusive. So we really wanted to make that concrete practice rather than something that we talk about with our friends at conferences. It's like, no, this is a day-to-day practice to do.
Yeah, I think about accessibility first, which I think is part of inclusion. And I'm heartened to see that our industry and the voice tech industry seems to take this conversation more seriously maybe than others have in the past. That's my experience from where I'm sitting, and I wonder if you might have that same feeling, or do you feel like we aren't there? I would love to know where you think we are just in terms of an industry.
I do think that accessibility is kind of a bit more of a priority in voice, or it seems to be. I think the reason for that is that voice stuff in particular, and more so than chat, has been offered as an accessible solution to certain things that are on a screen. So I think we've sort of had this built-in thought to the technology itself that has helped move that along. I think the lag now is more of the inclusivity side. Conversation is innately human, and so the exclusion of someone feels more potent than if it's in a purely technological state. So something like that's a device and that you tap on feels, or can feel, I should say, less personally impactful to be excluded than if it is something that is your natural state of being as a person.
Right. And how big a role, it seems that there's, the book goes into context, for example, right? I think that context is a really critical component here. So let's talk about that a little bit. I think that you get into context from memory, emotional context, context from data, ethics and data privacy, and you have this piece on what you call the last word. And I just think there's a lot there that doesn't get talked about. I mean, context is not talked about like in the industry as I've followed it much. That's why I'd love to bring that out. I thought it was an interesting chapter, and would love to open that up a little bit.
Yeah, the context chapter might be the one that we rewrote the most.
Oh, cool.
And I remember
that's great.
It was a huge topic. So really what we figured out talking to a bunch of people is that people do use the term context, but people mean all different kinds of things. Like developers sometimes use it to mean the state. Like, what is the state the interaction is in? And linguists use it to mean like all the non-verbal stuff that goes into how we communicate with each other. And, some people use it like Kathy Pearl and Deborah Dahl also write about how like you lose context if it doesn't remember from turn to turn of a conversation what it means. So we tried to break down, here are all the ways that you build context, from memory, from data, from knowing someone's location. And then that naturally lends itself to like the idea that for these systems to know your context, where you are, what device you're using, what you said 5 minutes ago, what your credit card is, it immediately inherently is also about privacy and agency over your data. So it is a complex issue. And in that chapter, I think we raise a lot of questions and we sort of give our answer, but I think the industry will keep talking about that issue because it's really complex.
And I think you said this, Pete, just previously, this is the part that makes the conversation feel real. It's what makes it feel like you're actually talking to a person, which I think is why there's so much packed in this chapter and why we rewrote it so many times. It was probably the length of a book. And we pared down to try to make it like whatever is the most actionable, concrete points for right now. But I would love to see other people write more on this because there's so much to say.
I think what's interesting, and my point is that there's been so much focus on conversation design as a practice area. And I think it's the next thing that actually needs to be really explored and overcome for the industry and the apps that we're interacting with really make it to the next level. I would equate it with user experience in mobile applications in a way. The first iteration of mobile apps from 2009 to 2013, 14, they were pretty, if we look back now, I mean, they were just mini billboards, a lot of them, and they didn't do a ton. But that's when the users were demanding experience, and then user experience helped us actually help that industry explode. And I would say context is what's going to be what really helps this industry get to the next level. So you mentioned what we said 5 minutes ago, but what about what we said 5 days ago or last month, and I think it's a really interesting and fascinating area. And I do agree. And, as a community builder, as somebody that, designs content and programming, I think, we want to delve further into this as we move forward. And I think we have to.
Mm-hmm.
And this definitely like lines up with what you brought up about trust. Like if you don't trust the device or the person on the other side of that conversation, then it can't hold the context because users aren't going to opt into that. They're not going to allow it. And then it sort of negates the conversation or the power of that conversation can have if you can't actually access the information that makes it most useful. Rebecca, were you going to add something there?
Yeah, I was going to kind of sidestep a bit and say, like, I think this context discussion is so important because it also shows that in conversation design specifically, design and development have to work really closely together. So, what data a system stores and in what form it is stored is usually not considered something a conversation designer would have to quote unquote worry about. But that is how all of that stuff impacts how we would write a prompt, how we would plan certain behaviors, what intents we're going to support. All of that feeds into what data we can and can't get. Mm-hmm. And so it's such a good example of like design and development have to sit down and talk about this so that the design can be implementable. Right. So implementation matches the design. And it's certainly like knowing those technical constraints is a huge part of how we make our plans. So throughout the book, we tried to include conversation starters for designers and developers or designers and stakeholders to kind of dig into this stuff together.
Right. Yeah. So it's really going to start impacting software architecture, right? And how do we architect solutions so that all the services that are up there, whether they're voice or mobile or other some kind of application, can access things. It's exciting because I think we're entering into that next phase of the industry and the world. So let's talk a little bit about what the state of the industry and like where things are going. And where do you think we are from an industry standpoint, the voice tech industry, just in terms of evolution? Would love to know your thoughts on that and what you think 2022 and 2023 are going to bring to the industry.
I think so I don't want to speak for Rebecca here. From my perspective, I think we're, like you're saying, we're kind of in like that maybe kindergartner stage. Like we've gone kind of past the first like learning to do the basic behaviors and like everybody's kind of on board. And now we're learning to engage with each other and like what that behavior looks like. And there is, I think in the upcoming years, the places where I've been seeing the most adoption and the most response to what users actually want is in the gaming area and that AR, VR. So really thinking about kind of the places that have room to play where people are willing to kind of take that leap a bit and want to be pushed beyond kind of the quote unquote normal or existing standard for what the experience is an area that I think is going to continue to lead the industry a bit in what we can do and how we tie some of these backend functionalities together with the desired experience from the user.
Yeah, cool. I agree with Diana that it's still, it feels early days. The designers still have to work with a lot of constraints. Things like, the sentiment analysis systems that I've worked with were surprisingly rudimentary. I say this to my students a lot. It's like, okay, Alexa and Siri's about 10 years old. Alexa's 7 or 8 years old. Mm-hmm. And like, this was a public facing number. 10,000 people have been employed. At least this number is a few years old. 10,000 people have been employed to work on the Alexa ecosystem.
Right.
That's an incredible amount of very talented brain power.
Yeah.
And then when you talk to Alexa, you're still going to notice problems. And that's true for all the assistants.
Yeah, sure.
I'm just using that as the example. But this stuff is really, really hard. Yeah. 10,000 people got Alexa to where she is, and there's still so much more to go. So I think what I always try to campaign for in the industry is like, okay, we got some basics down, and now our gap between what's conversational and what's not is the nuance. So we have to figure out how to replicate the nuance of conversation and how to make it scale. And those might be a little bit at odds.
Yeah, it's yeah, so you bring up an interesting thing. I think there is an interesting paradox with regards to that, but it is exciting times. I would say that, and MoDev, our background is we started as a mobile developer community back in 2009. And in 2011, when Siri was released, we hosted a meetup, and we had well over 100 developers there, and the whole meetup was about Siri. And the developers were talking about how they would be able to use voice to improve their applications or improve the use of their applications. That night will always stick with me. And so and developers were incredulous at that time, they still are, that Siri was not available to them, that they actually couldn't, it wasn't a service layer. It was a standalone feature on the iPhone. But I will always remember the conversations from that night. And it was early days in mobile applications. So a lot of our developers were game developers, very successful game developers, millions and millions of downloads. So I would say that, voice is in a similar state, maybe about the time Instagram was acquired. And, that was a big acquisition for a mobile application. I think it was $1 billion, and they had 13 employees. But just from a state of, if you look at where applications were at that time, and I think that acquisition was in 2013, if I'm not mistaken, we're in a similar spot, I think, in voice. So a lot of exciting and fun growth ahead. And in order for folks to get there, they're going to need to rely on experts like yourselves and the information that you have in this book. I want to thank you again for taking some time to chat with us today. The book is going to be a fabulous resource for this industry. Again, the book is Conversations with Things, UX Design and Chat, for Chat and Voice. The authors are Diana Deibel and Rebecca Evanhoe. Diana and Rebecca, any final thoughts as we get ready to wrap this up today?
I don't. Thank you, Pete, for having us. I have to say that we saw each other, I think, for the first time at the first Voice conference.
Yes.
So I just want to personally thank you for putting that together so that Rebecca and I had a chance to meet face to face.
Yep, that was the first time. I remember eating at the burger place across from the conference.
Yes.
Yep, and having so much fun. So yeah, that was, yes, Voice Summit was a huge event for me. It was the first time I was meeting like groups and groups of conversation designers. I think my parting thought would be, we kind of close the book on the note of, you know what, this is like here's all of our thoughts, and this industry is growing and changing, and it can't move forward without everybody contributing their voice and their thoughts. So now it's your turn. And so I think we just would say thank you to our readers, and we're really looking forward to the conversation continuing in the field.
So where will the readers be able to find your book?
It is available on Rosenfeld's website, Rosenfeld Media. It's also available on Amazon, like everything. And I think I heard somebody was able to get it from an independent bookstore. So you may be able to get it through your local bookstore if you want to ask them.
That is awesome. So definitely check out your independent bookstore. Well, thank you for telling me about your meeting at Voice. I have heard so many testimonials of folks that met at Voice, and Women in Voice started at Voice, and I always love that story as well. And the stories like yours that you got to meet in person, that's why we do what we do. And we're excited to get back together in person. We will definitely be getting back together in 2022. 2021, things are looking good. I'm fully vaxxed. I know a lot of other folks are as well. Right now, we're planning on virtual, but you never know. We may be able to figure something out, just given the state of like how well things are going from a vaccine standpoint. So I look forward to seeing you both in person again as soon as we can. And thanks again for spending time. Congratulations on the book, and enjoy your summers. And then we'll come back and we'll talk again in the fall.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.